Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry, and this is Da Bears Pod, and we're going to go through a couple different things today. As you can see from the thumbnail, we're talking about DJ Moore backing up his guy, Justin Fields, as we expected. We'll be talking about the Jaylon Johnson contract and other things that Poles had to say in his press conference. This is all leading up to the Combine. I do have some draft content coming out. I'm hoping tomorrow I can release it on the quarterbacks. I've been trying to go through everything. I was going to do quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and try to go through all the classes. It's just been too much. And I've really been focusing on this Bears stuff as a massive Bears fan. So I'm just going to stick to my lane here. There are still going to be some all NFL oriented videos coming out, but I have so much, attachment to the Bears that's kind of what I've been sticking with. And if you're watching this video, you probably like the Bears content anyway, or at least want to know what's going on if you're not a Bears fan, because they have the first overall pick and a very unique scenario in this Caleb Williams, Justin Fields debate that's been going on. So let's start off with DJ Moore. You know what? Let's start off with you subscribing. Let's subscribe. I want to hit 100 subscribers. We kind of plateaued here around this 75 mark. I'd like to hit 100. Tell your friends, tell your family. So help me out. Let's reach that goal. It would be awesome to reach it by, oh gosh, man. Let's do 100 subscribers in 2 weeks. That would be insane, considering I only have 75 or 76 right now. But let's try it. Tell your friends. Like the video too. That helps get the video out. But let's get into it. DJ Moore backs up his guy Justin Fields. He says that none of the quarterbacks in this draft class are as good as Justin Fields. He doesn't believe it. And I kind of agree to an extent. I think with any of these quarterbacks in year one, you definitely could see a step back because it's a rookie quarterback. Now, I think the problem that I have with it is just with Fields, we've seen that he hasn't had much development. And I've seen the graphic going around recently of Fields in the last 20 games versus Lamar in the last 20 games. Lamar was MVP. Fields was better in a couple of the categories. I don't like when people do that. I don't like doing the stat comparisons. You can go back and forth. Like the MVP, if it were just merely based on stats, and if a group of people didn't watch any of the games and they just looked at the numbers, it would probably be Dak Prescott or maybe Josh Allen. Had a lot of turnovers, but it'd probably be one of them. So I don't like doing these quarterback comparisons, especially because if you're going back 20 games, you're also kind of cherry picking specific games. Kind of a weird number to pick. Typically, you'd want to pick like a full season. But there was some bad games that Lamar had and some good games that Fields had right in that 20 window. So I don't really think that that's very fair to Lamar. But I also could agree that maybe he shouldn't have gotten MVP for me. Probably should have been Josh Allen. Just because, the defense was not what we expected, mainly because of the injuries that they had on their defense and other issues they were having. Some people wrote him off midseason, and Josh Allen, although I believe he had 29 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, which doesn't seem great until you recognize the 15 rushing touchdowns that he had. So, I think Josh Allen, I think was most deserving just because Dak, the rest of the team did support him a lot. Not that the rest of the team didn't support Josh. But anyway, let's get back to the topic. He backs up his guy, Justin Fields. And I think it also could be, obviously part of the reason he backs him up is because he's his current quarterback. He's going to back up his current quarterback. I think any player in the NFL would back up their current quarterback. We see Justin Jefferson backing up Kirk Cousins a couple of weeks ago. And I think if you asked any wide receiver, unless it was a historic wide receiver that wasn't getting targeted, let's talk about Davante Adams. Davante Adams probably wouldn't back Aiden O'Connell. But that's with obvious reasons. He had an off season, and it wasn't necessarily all his fault, so I could understand that. But anyway, I think it's normal for a wide receiver to back up their quarterback. I also think DJ Moore would just like to have the same quarterback for consecutive seasons because the Panthers had been bouncing around quarterbacks. Now the Bears are in this unique quarterback situation where I feel like if the Bears were picking outside of if the Bears honestly, even if the Bears were picking 4 and didn't have future capital that they wanted to give up to trade up into the top 3, I don't know if they take a quarterback. They probably just take Marvin Harrison Jr. and go, great, we have Fields who's shown a little bit of improvement and we can move forward, and take a generational wide receiver prospect, and then build the team. But having the first overall pick, having a guy like Caleb Williams, where the Bears have never really been in a position to draft a guy like that, you can go back and look at years where you go, oh, they could have taken this guy this year, but you never know how players are going to pan out. And even when the Bears have taken good quarterbacks, they have ruined them, which I think is another good part of the reason with Fields. I think Luke Getsy is a big part of the reason that Justin Fields got ruined. As Bears fans, I know a lot of us hated Matt Nagy and wanted to get rid of Nagy. I think if Nagy was the play caller, I think probably would have been a little better off than Getsy, just because of how bad Luke Getsy was as far as playing to the strengths of his players. We see dive off in Darnell Mooney, who was once a 1,000-yard receiver, Justin's favorite target, and sure, he dealt with some injuries, but if you watch a Darnell Mooney highlight reel just of his career so far in his few years, it looks like a lot of players' career highlight reels. And you can't base game just off of highlight reels, but there was a viral clip a few years ago of Darnell Mooney absolutely cooking Jalen Ramsey when he was like by far the number one corner in the league. And I miss seeing that. I think he's probably lost motivation too with, with how often Fields runs the ball and how often evidently the Bears run the ball, or Fields, doesn't see the guy in time, or doesn't have the balls to actually throw it, and Mooney's been open. It happens, and I think Mooney's probably frustrated with Fields at this point. Mooney's also been a good blocker for his size. Not that he's this amazing blocking wide receiver, but again, for his size, being a smaller guy, he does block well, and I think he would be valuable on the team. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I think he's been underutilized. I think Fields was not utilized to his abilities. I think it didn't seem like, at least, Getsy did anything to help Justin improve in the worst categories that he had, which was taking too long to throw the ball, not being able to throw with anticipation, fumbling the ball, and statistics like that. So you can look at the exciting big plays that he made and go, wow, that's amazing. And you can do the same thing with Caleb Williams too. You could argue there's a lot of times where he's held the ball a long time, and statistically, so far he's held the ball longer than, I'm sorry if you can hear this, I've got hail. It is like there's 2-inch size hail out right now. I don't know if the mic's picking it up, but anyway, I think you could make that argument for Caleb Williams. He takes a long time to throw the ball. I think the thing for me with Caleb is you've seen plenty of evidence of him making the quick, easy throws with anticipation. I think the detriment for him isn't as much that he hasn't shown evidence of making those throws, but he's actually chosen to throw the deep ball rather than those quick open passes. So Caleb Williams, it's evident in all of his film that he will pass on a quick short route if he thinks a deep route might get open. And I think that could really hurt him in the NFL. I also think, lack of under center snaps is going to hurt him. But I think that in the Fields Williams debate, I just look at what Caleb Williams does and his talent throwing the ball while also still being very athletic and kind of underrated is worth it. And that's why I think the Bears should go that route with as far as Caleb Williams and Fields. And then, again, I think that Luke Getsy is a big part of the detriment. I think if we would have had a guy, even like Shane Waldron now, or just any coach that had play calling experience and experience developing a quarterback, they took a guy in Luke Getsy, who was Aaron Rodgers' quarterback coach, no rapport prior of anything great or doing anything special or developing anybody. He was simply a guy that went onto the Packers staff as a quarterback coach and then got promoted to an offensive coordinator position for a quarterback that plays a completely different style of football. So it didn't make sense, and I am scared about the Falcons with their, they just hired Raheem Morris, defensive head coach, and the offensive coordinator, I can't remember his name, but I want to say he was the Rams quarterback coach. So it's like you're taking the guy that is Stafford's quarterback Stafford's quarterback coach, and you're making him the guy that's going to now develop Fields. And the reason I bring up the Falcons is they're right now favored to trade for him, and apparently they've already been in conversations about trading for Fields. Now, you could say that Fields, it would be a good situation for him because that's his hometown, and they all the weapons. They have Kyle Pitts, they have Drake London, they have Bijan, they still have Cordero Patterson, they still have Tyler Algier, and I'm probably forgetting a name. Their offensive line is improving, so there's a lot of good things to look for there. But I really wanted Fields to go there mid-season. If you watched my trade video, I projected him being traded there mid-season because he wasn't showing improvement, and it would have been a good time for the Bears to get out of him, and they would have potentially gotten more value. I don't know. Maybe his play towards the end probably increased his value, but the Bears also would have had a better draft pick, which ends up being 9 anyway. So that's kind of what I was thinking mid-season. I was already kind of writing him off, which I hated to do, but it was how it was. But I thought the Falcons would be perfect mainly because of Arthur Smith. Now that Arthur Smith is in Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin has openly said that he likes Fields, and I think that the Steelers have a younger team in general that would be good for him to build and grow with. And I think that's a perfect scenario for him, but I am skeptical about him going to the Falcons if that ends up being the case. But let's get back to the comments. DJ Moore, again, I think it's normal for a quarterback to get backed up by his wide receivers. I'll move on from that. I do believe that Luke Getsy is a big part of the reason that Fields had his problems and why this is even a debate at all. Moving on to Ryan Poles. Ryan Poles had a press conference kind of a leading up to the combine press conference, and he had a bunch of different points that he talked about. He did talk about his communication with Justin Fields, and he said he has been in communication with Justin and that he wants to do right by Justin. He wants to get Justin an answer as early as possible. It's just kind of an awkward situation, again, having that first pick and having to decide. And so he has been in communication with him, and Poles does such a good job of not showing his hand. His poker face is phenomenal. So I'm interested to see what happens there. There's already people saying that they would potentially bet that Fields gets traded this week. I know there's a lot of agents and a lot of coaches and just a lot of scouts and people in general at the combine. And it's a good time to meet, and it is a good time to make some of these calls. But at the end of the day, he did say he wants to do right by Justin and make sure the process goes as smoothly as possible. He also talked a little bit about somebody asked a question about the locker room. Is that going to be a problem? A lot of the guys in the locker room have Justin's back. How are we going to work through that? And he basically just brought up, all of our guys are pulling for our quarterback. And he said that it shows how well held together the locker room is. Now, you could debate that if you're breaking him away, that could cause a problem. But from what he mentioned, it seems like it's more than that. It seems like they are all as a group together, but it's not that there's one specific person holding everybody together. It seems like they all just get behind their coaches and have been happy in that regard, especially Matt Eberflus. So we'll see what happens with that. Moving on to the Jaylon Johnson contract, he actually answered a lot of questions about this. He talked about he's in a process right now with Jaylon Johnson trying to get a contract put together. And he said, let's see, what do we got here? Showing respect. So he showed respect to JJ through the contract negotiations and wanted to recognize the turnovers. He also said from the contract, which I thought was really interesting, the cash flow is strong, the guarantees are strong, and there's also opportunity to test the market. Now, if you break that down, cash flow is strong and guarantees are strong, does mean that he's getting a lot of the money up front, which I thought with his lack of consistent production statistically, it would. And he also mentioned he wants to see more of the turnovers in the future, or continue the upward climb of turnovers, I believe is the verbiage he used. But he says the guarantees are strong, so I would have expected a more incentivized contract, because if Jaylon believes that he can get 4 turnovers a year, or because that's basically what happened this past year, I think if he can do that, then I think, he would want to buy in to do that. And not just get a fully guaranteed contract. And I'm sure that's what Poles wants to do. Obviously, the player wants to get it all guaranteed. Like, obviously, the player doesn't want an incentive-based contract. But I think it would be reasonable to say that with showing how he can get takeaways, that he should be a little bit more deserving of a contract. But it was also 1 year. First 3 years, he had 1 interception. This year, he has 4. That's great, but he didn't show it consistently. So, I would have liked to see that. There was also, you could use as an argument against Jaylon, is the dropped interceptions. He had multiple dropped interceptions and actually multiple that could have went for 6. So you have to make those big plays to get these big time contracts. I originally projected that it was going to be around a 5-year, $100 million, but after he says opportunity to test market in the future, I'm thinking it could look like more of a 3-year contract, because he's only 24 right now, I believe. Yeah, I think he's 24, maybe 20. He's either 24 or 25. If he has a 3-year contract, that puts him at 27, 28, still in your prime as a cornerback, and you get an opportunity to test the market, probably get another 3 years. And whether that be in a much higher salary cap league with it increasing just $30 million this past year and even more opportunity for money, or maybe he manages to keep his play at the top of his game and is able to fetch a new record-breaking contract. So I'd be interested to see what happens there. I think the Bears should sign him. I think they should pretty much write a blank check. He's deserving of it. I had a conversation before the season with a group of friends that I'm in a fantasy football league with, and they all said they're like, Jaylon Johnson is not top 10, and I was trying to fight for him. Like, he's a top corner. He doesn't have the interceptions to back it up, but he's been locked down. Darrelle Revis didn't get a lot of interceptions, but he was locked down. Nobody threw at him, and that's what Jaylon Johnson does. And then this year he gets the interceptions and stays locked down, having one of the lowest passer ratings allowed in the whole league. And so it was nice to see that, and it was nice to finally see the turnovers. It is also sad, though, that the media only decides to recognize him once he's gotten those turnovers. It reminds me of Roquan Smith when he was on the Bears. Was never recognized as a top linebacker in the league, and they pretty much never gave him any recognition. He never got All-Pro, never to a Pro Bowl, and then 1 year with the Ravens, and he's in the Pro Bowl, first team All-Pro. I think you could also attribute that to having Fred Warner in the NFC. It's going to be harder for him to be in that conversation. Kind of like A.J. Hawk when the Bears had Brian Urlacher. I believe A.J. Hawk never got All-Pro, and I don't know if he even went to a Pro Bowl, but that was because Brian Urlacher was in the division. So I get it, but it's just sad that the media does not give much credit without having the stats to back it up. So if you watch him play, you know he's one of the best in the league. He proved it even more this year with his turnovers. Again, I think he's very worthy of a blank check. Pay him, if it's $22 million a year, I would get behind it. He's played like the best corner, and Jair Alexander's currently the top paid. I believe it's 21 or 21 and a half, or just over 21 a year. So whatever it's got to be. I mean, obviously we're not going to go to like 25 million or something, but I think he's deserving of it, and I think they should re-sign him. And it sounds like Poles is doing what he can to get to a contract, but we've lost other players due to contract problems, like Roquan Smith. So I don't want it to go the same way. You have to re-sign good players if you're going to be a good GM. So we'll see what happens there. I also wanted to talk about a snippet from, I've mentioned before on here that I listened to the CHGO Bears podcast, and they had Eric Washington, they had Ron Rivera on the show, and Ron Rivera gave very high praise for Eric Washington. That was the point I was getting to. So Eric Washington and Ron Rivera were on the same defense with the Panthers. I believe Eric Washington was the defensive line coach, and he had such high praise for him, talking about how he's kind of a defensive line specialist and how he is going to generate or help the defensive line generate pressure regardless. I'm interested to see how that works, especially with the linebackers and the DBs. Now, you could say that the linebackers were really good, and then the DB room was great last year. Got to fill a hole in Eddie Jackson, but I think that makes a lot of sense to hire a defensive line specialist as your defensive coordinator in this case, just because that is technically your biggest area of improvement. Although we saw a lot of improvement after getting Montez Sweat and having Eberflus call the defense, I think getting to improve that more, it would just be the best thing. So I'm hoping for that, but I did like to hear the praise from Ron Rivera of Eric Washington of the Bears' new defensive coordinator. Now, the last thing I wanted to get into was the wide receiver situation, because there are people talking about trading back and getting Marvin Harrison Jr. There's people talking about taking, whoever else is left, Bowers, Neighbors, or Odunze at 9. There's people that want to take Caleb and trade up and take Marvin Harrison at 3. And those are kind of the three big wide receivers everybody's talking about is Harrison, Odunze, Neighbors. I think Brock Bowers should be included, obviously not as a wide receiver, but just as a weapon. We just hired Shane Waldron, who likes to run a lot of 21 personnel. If you don't know what 21 personnel is, the first number is the amount of tight ends. Second number is running backs. So the 2 would be the tight ends. The 1 would be the running backs. 11 personnel is 1 tight end and 1 running back. And then the last number that they don't tell you is just the remaining amount of 5, and that tells you you're a wide receiver. So in 11 personnel, there's 1 wide receiver, 1 running back, and then the 3 wide receivers. Or 21 personnel, 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 1 running back. So if you didn't know that, now you do. Camera's shaking. But anyway, Shane Waldron runs a lot of 21 personnel. And as far as a backup tight end, we don't have a good one right now. So I feel like if you get Brock Bowers, I feel like you could use him anywhere. You could, if you have a two wide receivers on the field, you could put him at wide out, and you're probably running a run play, maybe if you're doing that. But he is a phenomenal blocker, and I think he is kind of like a second coming of maybe George Kittle's not a great comparison, but he is a really hard runner. He is a great blocker, and he is a vertical threat downfield. He's kind of the whole package. Big fan of Brock Bowers. So I wish he would get included more in the conversation because, again, I've talked earlier in the video of being higher on Mooney than most, and I feel like Caleb Williams could elevate that. I think, again, a lot of opportunities where Mooney was open downfield, Justin's not seeing him, and then he doesn't get the opportunity. I think he gets the opportunity with Caleb Williams. He's able to see the field better, and I think he's able to get through read progressions better. So I would love to see a DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, maybe Tyler Scott's the 3 still. Maybe you get him more opportunity. I wouldn't be completely against that, especially if we're getting a guy like Brock Bowers and able to line him up at wide receiver. I wouldn't feel as bad about that if that's the only guy left. There is people talking about Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and then Odunze just going 4, 5, 6. And I don't think it's completely out of the question. With the Cardinals definitely need a wide receiver and are almost for sure taking Marvin Harrison Jr. at 4 unless somebody trades up ahead. And then the Chargers at 5 just have an aging wide receiver room. Tried to nail a star in Quentin Johnson, and did not work out so far. Doesn't mean it can't, but hasn't worked out so far. And then you have the Giants at 6, who clearly they don't have any good receivers at this point. So they could all go. If Brock Bowers is there, I think you take him. A lot of people are saying Malik Neighbors is for sure going at that 5 or 6 spot. And then Odunze a lot of times is left till 9 in the mock draft, which I wouldn't mind. I actually think Odunze is probably the second best wide receiver. I've heard reports all over the place in people's thoughts about wide receiver, whether it be, most people say Marvin Harrison Jr. is the for sure number 1. But then you have people go, oh, maybe Marvin Harrison isn't the best. And then they show Neighbors or Odunze. I think it's pretty cut and dry that Marvin Harrison is the best. I didn't like that he's not going to show up for the Combine or the Pro Day. Not necessarily that there's nothing to prove. Would have been nice to see the physical metrics and see what he can do, even though it has been shown in the past that sometimes players will just perform better on the field in pads or seem faster, and their 40 time isn't necessarily the only judgment of their speed and cone drills and shuttle as far as agility goes. So, but I would have liked to see him do that, and to not show up at all. It's a good opportunity to be asked questions and to learn more about the person. So I don't really like that. Same thing with the pro day. Most people that skip the combine will at least do the pro day because it's a more comfortable setting. You're with your players and with your coaches, and he's not even doing that. So that I'm surprised that isn't bringing more headlines, because this is supposed to be this generational talent that grew up with a Hall of Fame wide receiver father who, for some reason, does. And I don't think he has to prove anymore, but I just think it raises questions. I think you could say the same about Caleb not throwing at the combine. I don't think he has to prove anymore, but it is something to question. Why is he not throwing? Especially since he said that he wanted to have a little bit more time to get his reps in and practice with his guys, which he's not going to have his guys in the NFL. Or is he? I talked a little bit about the three receivers. The wide receiver that I'm most interested in for the Bears in the situation where we take Caleb Williams is taking Brendan Rice. You can probably take Brendan Rice in the 3rd or the 4th round. And you can, I mean, he's, so we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. So I'm losing my words here. We're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr.'s son, while Jerry Rice's son is in the same draft. Brendan Rice is also 6'4". Both wide receivers taller than their fathers. And yes, Brendan Rice's his college statistics do not live up to a top receiver name, and they do not would not suggest that he is going to be a great wide receiver in the league. But there has to be something about being Jerry Rice's son that's got to help you growing up learn the game of football. Jerry Rice is the GOAT of being a wide receiver, and some people still will actually argue for the GOAT of football just because of how high and far ahead he is of every other wide receiver. But that's besides the point. I don't believe that. But being the son of that guy, that's got to mean something. He has big hands. He has a big catch radius. He's not the fastest, but he can definitely go up and get it. He's also not like a super sound route runner, but he can get the job done. And the biggest thing for me is his rapport with Caleb Williams. Arguably Caleb Williams' favorite target. You could argue for Taj Washington, sure. But to give Caleb Williams, a guy that he's played with for many snaps, to make him more comfortable entering the league, give him that guy. So now we have DJ Moore. We have the guy that Caleb Williams was most comfortable with in college through his years of his success. And then you also potentially, let's say if we were to take Brock Bowers, now you've got Brock Bowers. So lining up every time is going to be Caleb Williams at quarterback. You've got whoever the hell you want your running back to be with all the running backs. Running backs will be a different video, but Saquon, Tony Pollard, why is that the second name that I said? Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. There's so many free agent running backs that, that's a different story. We'll talk about that in another video. But let's just say, so it's Caleb Williams, insert running back here. We've got DJ Moore, Brendan Rice, Cole Kmet, moved to this hand for whatever reason, and Brock Bowers. That offense, you would just put that on the field. To me, you'd put it on every play. You have the guy that Caleb Williams is most comfortable with. You have DJ Moore, who's proved that he could be a good receiver with any quarterback. It could be a shit quarterback. He's going to put up 1,000 yards and have a great season. You'll have Brock Bowers, who's proved to be a good blocker and a huge receiving threat, and also a very hard runner, just like Cole Kmet. I mean, just all of that together, that just seems like the perfect recipe for success to me. And I think Brendan Rice is slept on in the draft. I think it's for this specific situation. I think this is for when for where Caleb Williams goes, because you can get Brendan Rice in like the 3rd, probably the 4th round, unless he puts up some insane metrics at the combine. You can get him fairly later, and I think to get a guy that could have rapport with Caleb Williams is just next level, especially that late. Jerry Rice's son too. It makes too much sense for me. So that's who I think should be the biggest target for the Bears as far as value-wise. Do I think Brendan Rice is going to be better than Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., what's the guy's name? McConkey. Lad McConkey. I think McConkey, he's probably better than Brendan. I think there's a lot of people that are better than Brendan Rice. So I'm not saying that he's going to be this amazing guy. But I think that it would make the Bears' situation better to help that situation. Honestly, even if the Bears take a wide receiver at if they are moving on from Mooney and they're have decided that Velus Jones Jr. is just going to be a special teams guy, and Tyler Scott they're not done with, but they'll give him time, but they aren't sure. I think you could take Roma Dunze in the first, and then take Brendan Rice in the third or the fourth, and I wouldn't completely be against that. Again, I don't think wide receiver is necessarily the biggest need either. I think you could argue that the other edge rusher or just one of the two positions on the defensive line or even center is a bigger need, especially with the players available this offseason in free agency. Now, I think that'll be a different conversation, but you could also argue that the centers are good options. My favorite, I'll give that away, Tyler Biadasz. I would love for the Bears, as a Wisconsin fan, I would love for the Bears to have Tyler Biadasz. I think that fixes that problem instantly. I also wouldn't be against drafting Jackson Powers-Johnson or Cedric Van Pran. I don't know why his draft stock has just flown out the window and everybody hates on him. I don't hate on him, but his projection has just consistently gone down and down and down, and I don't necessarily see what the problem is, especially being surrounded by a lot of other talented offensive linemen that the Bears have at, honestly, to me, every other position except for center. You can make an argument that Nate Davis wasn't a great signing, but he had a lot of unique situations there. You can probably hear that hail. A lot of unique situations last year where he had a family member die, and then he had some injury issues, and there was more to it to me from that, and I think he can be still be a good offensive lineman for the Bears. But anyway, back to my point, I wouldn't be against them taking two wide receivers in this draft. And I think if you want to try to lock in and secure a nice wide receiver core for years to come, taking two in this draft isn't a horrible idea. You would lock in for the next 4 years, if it's Caleb Williams, the two receivers, and DJ Moore, and you have Cole Kmet. So you're set. You're set at that position if you hit on the wide receivers. So that's what I think about it. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the for sure number one target. I personally don't think it's worth trading up for him. I think if for some reason the Bears decided to trade back, I think that's got to be the guy you're taking. I think it would be dumb to trade back farther than probably 4, with the Cardinals, and I don't see that really happening. I think you have to probably trade back with the Commanders or the Patriots to make that work. Ideally, the Commanders and the Patriots. I don't see a reason the Cardinals would trade up to number 1, so you probably have to trade with one of those two teams. But I don't think that it would make sense to me personally, but if they did it, I would understand it. I think that is the only situation that you take Marvin Harrison Jr. is if you're trading back to 2 or hopefully 3. I think you don't trade up for Malik Neighbors, too. I think maybe if there's a situation where, I don't know, if he falls and you really want Malik Neighbors and he falls to 7, I guess you could consider it. Or if you think the Falcons might take him and you need to trade up a pick and do what the Eagles did and give up like a 4th or something, I could listen to that. If for some reason Bowers and Dunze are gone and you really want to go that route. But I really wouldn't be against going Jared Verse or Dallas Turner or Jerzon Newton. I think those are my 3 biggest prospects for defensive line, and there's a chance they'll all be there at the 9 spot. I think you could actually trade back that 9 if you want to take Jerzon Newton, and if you're fine with Dallas Turner or Jared Verse, you also could probably trade back a few picks with a team like the Broncos, depending on the situation, or the Raiders, or probably not the Vikings with interdivision, but you could probably trade up with one of those or trade back with one of those teams and take one of those guys too. So it's an interesting situation. I think Odunze at 9, I would you can sign me up for that. I have no problem with that at all. I think he could be the second best wide receiver in this draft. I think he could be better than Neighbors. I think it's going to depend on the situation they go to as well. But I would be perfectly fine with Odunze or Bowers at 9. So that kind of gives away my order of what I'm thinking about the wide receivers as of right now. But this is also mainly just for a fit for the Bears too. I think with Rome Odunze, you have kind of a lot of the similar skill set to DJ Moore. He's a little taller, a little bit bigger. I don't think he's like DJ Moore could probably be a running back with how talented he is with the football. And Rome Odunze is very talented too. I don't think he's to that point where you could argue that he could be a running back. But DJ Moore kind of ventures into that Deebo Samuel role. But DJ Moore also has the ability to make amazing catches. And I think that whole ability combination put together is a reason why DJ Moore is kind of slept on, because people don't really talk about him as a top 10 wide receiver. But if you look at what he can do, he's 6 foot, he's over 200 pounds, which is more like a running back size. Typically a 6 foot tall wide receiver like is going to be like 180, 190 pounds. I believe DJ Moore is like 205 or 210, so he's bigger for a wide receiver. And if you watch him, he can run people over. He will look for contact. He'll fight for extra yards like a running back. But he can also be shifty, get around you. He can make the nice routes. And he is one of the few that can do it all. He does what Deebo Samuel, or he could do what Deebo Samuel does. But I also believe he is a better strictly receiver than Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel kind of gets his flowers by, the brilliance of Kyle Shanahan giving him these run opportunities. And I think, DJ Moore did that a little bit under Luke Getsy, but I think it was underutilized. I think that could have been done more. And some run plays that went to wide receivers should have just went to DJ Moore and not Trent Taylor and these other horrible plays that Luke Getsy called. But we'll stop talking about Luke Getsy. He's gone. He's on the Raiders. Anyway, I think DJ Moore is a top receiver. I think it's great that he backed up Justin Fields. I think he's going to back up his guy no matter what. I think he's going to be perfectly fine if Caleb's his quarterback, as long as Caleb isn't missing him when he's wide open or play calling is not designed for him, which I couldn't see a team doing. I think the wide receiver situation for the Bears is going to be a good situation. I didn't even really talk much about free agency. It looks like a lot of these potential free agents have gotten tagged. It looks like T. Higgins is going to get tagged. If he didn't already, he might have gotten tagged already. And some of the top prospects are looking like it's like, I guess Mike Evans was talked about. I think he'll get tagged potentially, or maybe even signed. But like Curtis Samuel is one of the names that's looked at as the best free agent. Actually, Darnell Mooney is also looked at. And again, if you're going with a new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, I don't see what the difference is re-signing him if you can get a good deal versus, just letting him go somewhere else. I'd like to see more production for him. I think that could be on the Bears now that you're changing out those two key pieces that were kind of neglecting him. But I also wouldn't mind seeing him go to the Chiefs and then give Patrick Mahomes a great receiver and in Darnell Mooney and actually see him have success. I would not be against that at all. For anyone that wants to bring up Darnell Mooney's drop in was that in overtime, the end of the game, Hail Mary, where it bounced right into his lap and he dropped it. Darnell Mooney had 2 drops on the season, and he had 2 drops on the prior season. So that's 4 drops in 2 years. That's only on 60 targets, while the previous season, before that, he had 140 targets and still only 4 drops. So if you look at if you actually look at the advanced stats for it, majority of the issues with Darnell Mooney were actually inaccurate passes, which Fields fans aren't going to like to hear, but that is the truth. And that is my opinion on the wide receiver situation. Just quick recap. Again, I think Marvin Harrison's the best. I think Brendan Rice is the best value for the Bears in the situation that they take Caleb Williams. If they don't take Caleb Williams, I don't think Brendan Rice makes a lot of sense. If you take him later, I'm not against taking a shot on a wide receiver, but that to me would be lining up to be similar to like Velus Jones Jr. and Tyler Scott with the lack of productivity that they've had so far in their career. And that is my opinion on that. I'm going to try to get the draft video out tomorrow. So like for that, comment on any of your opinions on what you thought of Poles' interview if you watched that, or what you think Ryan Poles should do. And then let me know what you think of the wide receiver situation and who do you want to take whether it be free agency or in the draft. But thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a great day.